if we are in connection with someone who maybe processes quicker, or just doesn't need
Mhm.
separate time to process, there might be this like sense of urgency inside of us to like be responsive, or maybe even
Yeah.
from the other person, right? They could project it onto us.
Mhm.
And I think getting comfortable with asking for what you need. So like I hear you and I want to be responsive and I need some time to process.
Yes. Mhm.
And being okay with that. And of course there will be people in our lives who don't like that or don't respond well to that. And someone else's response to us having that need isn't actually our problem.
Mm. Let's say it again.
And I know that's hard. I mean, even
Welcome to Sensitive Stories. This episode is for educational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for treatment with a mental health or medical professional. Let's dive in.
So, Danica, could you start off by telling us your HSP discovery story? How and when you realized that you're a highly sensitive person?
yeah, I went to, well, I guess it's actually a two-part story. So, which I'm sure it's like multi-layered for many of us.
Yes.
I had a therapist that I was seeing while I was in graduate school, so like kind of my second half of grad school, and she asked me just like very point blank, without any detail or like explanation of what it was. She was just like, "Are you a highly sensitive person?" And it came following this conversation that we had had about emotions, and so about my emotions, and particularly about my emotions being big. And I remember just feeling so put off by the question because it sounded like almost derogatory.
Yes.
And so, but of course it sat with me, right? So like I heard the question and I was like, no, I don't think so. Because what I heard her say was like, are you emotionally overreacting, or are you
Mm.
emotionally like dysregulated or something? Which like that might have been the case as well. And that's not what she was asking. And then just like maybe it was like 2 or 3 months after that, I went to this intensive, it was like 6 or 7 day long training that was focused on complex trauma.
Mm.
And one of the days was focused on highly sensitive people. And we heard a little bit about it, and I was like, oh, I remember this concept. And then we watched Sensitive
Oh, you
by Elaine
did.
Aaron. And watching that was just like, I felt like this awakening was happening for me as I was watching that. And I was like, oh, this is me. This makes sense.
Yes.
And then we had of course, a debrief and some training stuff about it. And I was like, this is 100% me. So that's how I came to know it. First to learn of the term, and then also to identify with it.
I love the journey that you went on, which I've heard before with folks that initial reaction is no, this
Mhm.
is not me. Because it does, it can feel derogatory, like an insult, especially if you've been
Yes.
told you're too sensitive, you're too fragile, all the things we hear as sensitive people. So there can be that immediate defense or protection. But then once you actually step into what it really is and get the
Mhm.
full picture, and I'm excited that you were able to see that documentary at a training. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was great. It was so great. It's
Incredible.
interesting because I've now shown that documentary in classes I've
Mm-hmm.
taught, and then of course on our
Yes.
team. And I think a lot of therapists probably are, I mean, not all, but I think a lot of us are
Yeah.
highly sensitive. And it was so interesting when I came back from that training. I was like telling everyone in my life, like, I'm highly sensitive, and everyone
Yes.
was like, yes, this makes sense for you. And then I was like giving all of my friends who I just knew, I was like, you're highly sensitive too. So I'm like
Yes.
giving them the quiz to take online. And it actually is like a big part of my life now, and a big
Mm-hmm.
part of dialogue in my own community, and certainly with clients too.
It's funny, I did the exact same thing because at the time I was in grad school and working at a counseling center, and I remember being in the office and giving everyone the self-test.
Yes.
And I was around a lot of sensitive people going to more of a non-traditional school. But yeah, you can kind of, I don't know if this was true for you, but you know who the people are better.
Yes.
Once you learn about their, like, oh, you, and you.
Yes, for sure, for sure. Well, and I felt like I was also able to discern like who definitely wasn't,
Yes.
and maybe like why we weren't necessarily like experiencing things similarly,
Mm.
at least when it came to like emotionality, and like I think like sensation in particular, like different
Mm, hmm.
environments being like overstimulating or feeling like really reactive in different settings. I think, and then watching other people, especially peers at work, like not experience that, I think that helped me to see
Yeah.
like, oh, like we're just different. And when is it
Right.
right or wrong?
Thank you. It's not right or wrong. It's just
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
Yes, that's such an important message. So you're easily able to tell based on how people responded to their environments, to what was going on. For the people that you knew were sensitive, what were you seeing in them?
Well, I'm thinking about like two of my closest girlfriends,
Hmm.
pretty immediately, like even during the training, I was like, oh, both of them are too. And I think what drew me to like immediately think of them is that kind of our shared passion and interest around like the arts,
Yeah.
like each of us being like very into like music and concerts and live theater and
Hmm.
being like kind of emotionally like on the surface, like more our emotions being more at the surface and like being tearful more easily, either in like, because like of upset or because of
Sure.
joy. And then just also, I think both of these friends in particular, like having the language around their own
Oh,
internal experience, like a lot of awareness and knowing of their internal experience. So that kind of,
yes.
I think for me, like as I was like really coming to understand all of the different ways someone can be an HSP, I think the two of them being more similar to me, probably, like
Hmm.
I was like, oh, well, if I am, they probably are. And because
Yeah.
we share these things. And then of course, like once I started really understanding, like, oh, some people can be higher in certain traits than others, that helped me to kind
Yes.
of see, because I see that with clients too. Like I'll have a
Hmm.
client where like they're highly sensitive in ways that are different from mine, right? But the
Right.
nuance took time for me to understand.
Yeah, it's like those people that want to go deep in various ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're all different, but I think we all share that. Whatever our interest is, our passion is, we want to dive and go all in, and it's lovely to be able to pick that up in other people and say, oh, we're similar in this way.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. What
Mhm.
when you realize that you're sensitive or highly sensitive, what changed in how you take care of yourself? Did that shift at all once you realize, oh, I have this trait?
Yes, 100%. And
Hmm.
actually, that was something that remains something that I'm like really proud of in myself, because I feel like I pivoted pretty quickly. It was
Mm-hmm.
almost as if like that, like having some sort of organizational system for myself or having a way to think of myself and like me in my environments, like
Yeah.
it allowed me to soften to myself. and
Mm-hmm.
and that, that's something that's very important to me when I'm in the work that I do. It's all about like gentleness and softening and validation. And I think a lot of that for me came from understanding myself as highly sensitive and knowing that like I don't have to keep pushing myself in ways that are causing me harm. Like
Mm-hmm.
this isn't about me being deficient or not being able to handle big things. I handle a lot of big things
You
and have
do.
historically handled a lot of big things.
Yes.
But like if the lighting is causing me a headache, I
Right.
can change the lighting. Or if there's something about my schedule that's not working for me, I can advocate for myself within it. I mean, it's part of
Right.
even the transition into private practice was being able
Mm-hmm.
to take some ownership over what my schedule and life look like. And of course, that's a
Yes.
privilege to be able to do that.
Sure.
And I was not thriving in your kind of typical 8 to 5,
Yeah.
high overhead lights, no autonomy over my schedule. I felt it was really depleting um,
Mm-hmm.
my capacity and also like just my ability to function well.
It does, and we have to be able to look at what can I change. So if you can't go out
Yes.
on your own, you can't work for yourself, which I also think is a very important for a lot of HSPs to have that autonomy, to have choice. But if you can't, what can you change? How can you advocate for yourself with what you have control over? 'Cause yeah, why not turn the light down?
Right.
It could open up space for something else.
Yes.
And yeah, right? It really does.
Yeah. Yeah. That's been something I think just even I can be like I can like become sensationally overloaded
Mm-hmm.
pretty easily. Like too much stimuli coming in will kind of flip me into overload pretty quickly.
Yes.
And so I've gotten pretty good at even like, if I'm like sharing space with another person and maybe they don't experience the world in the same way, like I'll
Right.
sometimes find that that person might be able to handle like more stimuli than I can. And I've just gotten really good at saying like this overloads me instead of like I don't
Mm.
like it.
Yes.
And I do. I totally agree with you. I think it's about what can we change. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
we overlook the smaller things we can change, like turning the TV down, changing the lights, reducing stimulation in our environment through even like tactile sensation,
Mm-hmm.
and really like, well, what can I do right here, right now to like
Yes.
set me up for like a better experience of the day? Because there are going to be things we don't have control over.
Right. But we can, those little things make a big difference because of our differential susceptibility. A little goes a long way, which I love to remind people of. It's like I don't really like to use this word too much, but it is like our superpower that we can benefit greatly from little small changes. You talked a lot about the sensory experience. Can we talk a little bit more about why it's important to focus on our physical experience as HSPs, our somatic experience?
Yeah, and of course, we never like accidentally find ourselves in this material, right? Like I like found out I was an HSP and then like found myself to like body-based healing work, and I'm like, oh
Yes.
well, I'm sure all of this is very connected for me.
Right.
But yeah, I think some of it's what you just said, like being able to like have small changes have a big impact.
Yeah.
I think it's also about increasing body awareness and in a way where like the person doesn't feel just the activated sense. So I
Mm-hmm.
want to, for me, I want to know that my internal experience isn't merely the activation that runs in the background all the time of my life because of a
Mm-hmm.
trauma history. I want to know that I can have varying and differential sensations in my body. And so if I can attend to varying sensations externally, I might be able to increase that interoception or that inner knowing as
Yes.
well. And so I do think there's at least some sort of relationship between those things. And what I'll often the way I'll kind of focus in on that with clients, whether they're highly sensitive or not, is like let's just talk about meeting the basic needs of life, like hydration,
Yep.
nourishment, rest cues, bathroom cues, and that stands to teach us a lot about our external and internal environments, I think.
Mm-hmm. That's something I've been trying to do more is just take care of my basic needs. Am I hungry? Do I have to go to the bathroom? Do I need a break? Do I need to rest? Can we say more about why that's so important of starting there with our basic cues?
I
How
think
that's helpful?
Yeah, I think for a number of reasons, like we're just as people, all of us are pretty disconnected.
Mm-hmm.
I almost think of it as like a hill we jump over. It's
Okay.
like we come into the world with most of us, depending on our biology, we come into the
Mm-hmm.
world pretty aware of, or we can quickly get to being aware of all of those internal cues and sensations. And then we engage with people socially and we engage in systems that tell us, like, actually, no, you eat on a schedule or you go to the bathroom between classes or, whatever it is. And so I think
Right.
very early on in our development, we actually get pretty disconnected from our internal knowing.
Mm.
And if we're disconnected from our internal knowing about our basic needs, then it becomes, I believe, really challenging to know some of the more complex knowing or to be in access to some of that more complex knowing. Like it's really hard for us to suss out relationship stuff with someone with our emotions and sensations and everything else when like I don't even know when I'm thirsty.
Right. Right.
So
You've
I
completely
think if we
disconnected.
yeah, so if we can like and it's not low threat because it's certainly like hydration and nourishment. Those are like, if we don't have those things, that's very dangerous to our bodies. But they're not typically like up for debate topics. Like most of us would not say like, oh, I don't need water to live or I don't need nourishment to survive, right? So it's not an emotionally laden topic. So,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times I'll be sitting with a client doing somatic work and they're wanting to resolve or work through something very complex. And I'll say, we got to start here though. We have to
Yeah.
start with some of these basic needs being attended to because if you can tell me when you're thirsty and just me for the purposes of the session, I know you're going to be better equipped at understanding the variety of sensations that exist in your body.
Right. We're slowly leading up, reconnecting with ourselves. Would you find that HSPs are, this may be too general, but are more disconnected because we've often been taught to ignore our needs? You don't feel that, you don't need that. Push yourself through so you can show up like everyone else. Is that something that you see?
I do see that, and I think
Hmm.
simultaneously we're quicker to overwhelm as well.
Yes, that
So it's
too.
like disconnected and also more overwhelmed at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that then, if they find their way into some of these body-based or bottom-up sorts of healing modalities, then it's like, okay, well, let's start by just like validating that, like, yep, you're disconnected because you've been taught to be, and also you're overwhelmed because of how disconnected you are and how overstimulating the external environment is.
Mm-hmm. And when we're overwhelmed constantly, starting with the basics is the best way in for
Mm-hmm.
everybody, really, but especially if you're overwhelmed by your
I think
environment.
so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, for folks that don't know, what bottom up is?
Yes. I realize I say that sometimes and as if like everyone would know. And of
I know, I
course,
do the same. Yeah.
yeah. So I think I like to think of it, when we put it in conjunction with like top down and bottom up sorts of types of healing. So
Mm-hmm.
top down from the head down, we're working with cognitions. We're working in a more logical or concrete domain. I always think the top down stuff is really, really good for like, I need to check something off my to-do list, or I need like task completion, or something where
Logistical.
there's, yeah, something where there's an
Yeah.
actual solution, like a
Mm.
tangible, I can do this one thing and this is the outcome.
Yep.
The bottom up rather works literally from the bottom up into the body. And so we're really acknowledging that, yes, the brain has an experience of you and what happened and your memories and all of that, but that trauma and activation and all of that is stored in the body. And so we have to be in conversation with the body in order to heal some of these trauma responses that we're holding, or some of the incomplete trauma releases that we didn't get to have.
Mm-hmm. What does a trauma release look like?
It can look like so many things.
Yeah.
I often, when I'm working with clients, so I tend to work with folks who experience high activation,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that just kind of their entire life experience is they're living above their window of tolerance, meaning, they may be quicker to anxiety, quicker to the
Mm-hmm.
physiological response in their chest of
Mm-hmm.
like their heart racing, or they might feel like they panic sometimes. And it's not to say that they're not necessarily having that experience, but just kind of like they're quicker to be flooded, overwhelmed, activated.
Got it. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so for those folks, when I think about a trauma release, or like like having them complete a trauma response, I'm wanting to help them reach a kind of a state of catharsis around like a incomplete fight response or flight response.
You get to actually move your body in the way it originally wanted to respond.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, because we see that in nature, right? Animals will shake it off and then they're fine. Animals do not get PTSD when they're allowed to have their natural cycle
Right.
or a traumatic event.
Right.
So you're helping people do that, to like release that energy from the body.
Yes, that's the
Mm-hmm.
goal. And
Mm-hmm.
I think if we, the body goes into a shutdown when we're experiencing trauma, right? So it's like, well, I'm doing
Yeah.
what I have to do to survive. And
Mm-hmm.
then we just redo that pattern over and over. So then it becomes the
Right.
case where people will be having a full-blown trauma response to a very ordinary, yet stressful, but ordinary situation. And if we can begin to release some of that held trauma or those trauma responses, then the body can reorient and begin to actually have what I would consider like measured and proportionate responses to the here and
Mm-hmm.
now.
Right, you're not constantly trying to fight holding that dam up.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. How exhausting that is.
So exhausting.
And it keeps you to have to keep disconnected from yourself.
Right.
Yeah, and that's comes at a high cost. Can we tease apart a little bit? This is something I've been trying to make sense of for myself, just somatically. So we have, the impact of trauma on the body and the nervous system. But then we have, as an HSP, we have that heightened overwhelm and stress. Do they show up the same? Are they different in how they present? What have
Mm.
you seen?
Yeah. I'm like, ooh, that's a really good question.
Because they seem like the same flavor,
Yes, I agree
right?
with that.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, maybe intensity is what is
Yeah.
the differentiating factor for me in that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, okay, I'm thinking about like some of the clinical work I've done and kind of how that has
Mm-hmm.
manifested, and really helping clients to discern the difference between like what is overwhelm that is like normative for you and your
Right.
body,
Right.
and then what is a trauma response that you're
Right.
having. And I think they can look maybe the same for some
Mm-hmm.
people, very, very similar.
Yeah.
I also think some of it's about like the ability to, like, if I were to change something in my environment, does that change
Mm-hmm.
the outcome? Or if I'm
Mm-hmm.
more resourced, does that change the outcome?
Mm-hmm.
That might be something I would think about. Like if, like as a highly sensitive person, I know that I'm quicker to overwhelm when I'm not rested,
Yes.
but a trauma response might come up indicative of whether I'm rested or not if the
Right.
circumstance was triggering.
Absolutely. I think that's a good tell for HSPs in a lot of different ways that we can present as having trauma, as experiencing ADHD, a lot of other pieces, or just being generally emotionally dysregulated. And we get stuck in those states because we're not resourcing. We're not able to take the stress levels down. And that can start to look like other things
100%.
when it's unchecked. Yeah. How do we start to resource? I know we talked about the basics,
Hmm.
but if I'm starting from scratch,
Hmm.
what does that look like to start resourcing?
One of the things that I learned in my somatic experiencing training is like a prompt you might ask someone when you're engaging in some of this initial somatic work would be something like, in the last week, or you could say last 3 days, tell me about a time when you felt the most like yourself.
Mm,
And what I find is, and I'm sure you experience this too, a lot of people don't really know their self. Like, and I'm
yeah.
thinking about that in like capital S self,
Yes.
like who am I actually? And not only like who am I, but like have I ever been in touch with that me?
Mm,
And so I think like helping people to kind of bridge the gap between like I don't know who I am and like I don't exist,
yeah.
because I think like of course we do exist. And so there's probably some knowing we all have about ourselves at the outset of this process or journey that we just haven't named as a part of us yet. And so I
Yeah.
think like helping someone to know or see like, well, what makes up when you think of who you are, what is one, even if you can come up with only one factor, like,
Right.
how did you know that you felt more like yourself yesterday at 2 p.m.
Mm,
than
mm-hmm.
the rest of the days this week? And I think helping to vivify that. So like any bit of knowing they do have, I want to lean into that knowing, and I want to know, how do they know that? What cues are they getting from their body?
Mm-hmm.
What is their brain telling them? Another kind of function of somatic experience and work is looking at like, so not just the sensations and the thoughts, but also like memories that come up, internal behaviors in the body or reactions in the body, images that come to mind. And so like I'm really and emotions, of course, I'm really looking to like what piece of that is the person most readily available, and can
Yes.
we like vivify that enough to help them establish a sense of self.
Mm,
And I think
mm-hmm.
that sense of self, along with tending to some of these basic needs, then
Yeah.
it's like, to me, we have this like ability to be like very, very curious and like, what else? If we stacked on top of like, well, you've got to drink water and you have to eat food, what's the very next thing? And it might be,
Yes.
a comfort need, it might be something around scheduling, but I think we have to get curious about who the person is and who the self is, so that we know like, well, what works for you differently than what works for me.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Like spending time with yourself, getting to know yourself again if you've felt disconnected. And
Right.
it sounds like there's so many options. And I just think how well an HSP is suited to do this work, this introspective healing work, having such a vivid emotional landscape, creativity, dream life, create, all the different pieces. It could be really rich work for an HSP.
Yeah, and I think that's where, I feel very lucky to be a highly sensitive person
Mm-hmm.
myself and to get to work with so many folks who are highly sensitive, because we can be so creative. Sometimes clients will bring in an image that they saw or a song that really spoke to them, and like now we went from like having nothing to having a tangible thing,
Right.
and we can work with the tangible thing. It's like any point can be an entry point. We just need something to
Mm,
start. And especially if it's like something organic coming from the client and there's something they maybe can't even pinpoint it, but I relate to this or I connect with this, it's like perfect. There we go. Now we have
right.
now we have some place to start. And from there, I actually do think we can begin to get so curious about ourselves and so interested in ourselves that it's like, oh, well, actually, I do know what some of my preferences are, and I do know what some of my needs are, and I do
Yes.
know about how I can show up and maybe how I can't show up in connection with others.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What are my preferences? What are my needs? We often are so oriented outward
Yeah.
And I'm constantly reminding my clients, turn that compass back inward. What
Yeah.
do you need? Because we really cannot gauge based on what other people are doing.
Yeah.
Do you find that folks get resistant to that part of the work of turning it back inward?
For sure. I think it's, it's threatening for those of us who have experienced childhood trauma. It's so
Mhm.
scary. It's so risky
Yeah.
to like, if I go inward, will I survive? Will
Right.
will I be able to see danger coming if it comes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think one of the things I'm always reminding clients of is like these coping skills you developed are like fine-tuned over time.
Yes.
And us adding a new way of existing is not actually a threat to this well-developed, well-earned way of existing. We're just trying to broaden, not
Mm-hmm.
take away. So,
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
can trust this person to suss out the world, but maybe we'll actually suss out the world a little bit more accurately to our current context if we include us in the story.
Mm-hmm. Include yourself in the story.
Hmm.
I love that so much. Um, yeah, when as we're doing this work, I'm just thinking about how HSPs tend to move more slowly. So yes, we have a rich inner life, um, but because we feel so deeply and we need more time to process, um, is it better to to be able to move more slowly or give yourself permission to have this process look differently than maybe it would with someone else?
Yeah, I think so. And
Yeah.
I would say that's true whether someone, when I think about it from a complex trauma perspective,
Mm-hmm.
one of the gifts we need is time and space.
Yes.
Because when we were experiencing trauma, that those were the two things or two of the things that were lacking, right? We did
Mm-hmm.
not have time, we did not have space. And
Mm-hmm.
so being able to just trust that like, wow, our journey is going to be what it is. And we don't
Yeah.
actually need to put a time frame on it and we can't measure it against someone else. And it's like one session where there's
Mm-hmm.
insight can be like that could be the journey or it could be 5
Yeah.
years and
Right.
one isn't like better or worse than the other, but the goal is always like increased knowing and I think increased gentleness with self.
Yeah, coming back to that softness, that gentleness, which you said that's been so pivotal for you in your personal life or in your personal journey. But it's true, we need more of that. I
Yeah,
hear a lot of HSPs talking about that desire to slow down.
yeah,
I mean, a lot of people need that these days,
for
but
sure.
especially us to have time to go into your internal world. I'm just curious if we could expand upon that when you're creating time and space for yourself, what could that look like if you're doing it on your own versus maybe with a practitioner?
Well, immediately when you asked that, the thought that came up for me is like around boundaries, like time and space boundaries and relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So like if we are in connection with someone who maybe processes quicker, or just doesn't need
Hmm.
separate time to process, there might be this like sense of urgency inside of us to like be responsive or maybe even
Yeah.
from the other person, right? They could project it onto us.
Hmm.
And I think getting comfortable with asking for what you need. So like I hear you and I want to be responsive and I need some time to process
Yes. Hmm.
and being okay with that. And of course there will be people in our lives who don't like that or don't respond well to that. And someone else's response to us having that need isn't actually our problem.
Mm. Let's say it again.
And I know that's hard. I mean, even as I say it, I'm like, oh yeah, right. When you're in relationship, it probably feels like it's your problem.
Yes.
And I think like in order to be well resourced, we cannot always and really shouldn't as a practice take on
Hmm.
other people's needs and projections. We can hear them, we can validate them, we can say like I hear you have a need for a response from me and I want to be responsive and I need a few minutes. And it's like all of that can actually exist at the same time.
Absolutely. Right. Everyone's needs are important.
Yeah.
Right. And it's helpful to communicate. I hear you. I want to be there for you. And here's what I need to. Can
Right.
we find a compromise?
Yeah. Yeah. And we might
Hmm.
not be able to get all of the time and space that we need in all instances. Again, like you said, we can't change everything,
Right.
but man, I think of it as like where are degrees of freedom? Like
Ooh, yeah.
if I can get a little bit of softening in one area, or if I can create some space for myself in one domain of my life, I'm
Hmm.
probably going to be able to show up a little bit with a little less flexibility elsewhere.
Yeah, coming back to that of looking at the big picture,
Yeah.
right? And I love that degrees of freedom. If I can't get it here, maybe I'll get it over here, and then it balances out, hopefully, overall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious for yourself, what are some of your favorite ways to get more freedom, create more space to yourself, take care of your own nervous system? What does
Yes.
that look like?
I'm excited to share those because I feel
Oh,
like
I
I'm
love
at a
it.
state in my life where like this is something I think about a lot.
I love
Um,
it.
yeah, something that's very important to me is like to have my coffee in the morning,
Mhm.
in a very particular way. So it's like I do my normal like get up, get ready stuff pretty
Mhm.
quickly, and then it's coffee time for me.
Yes.
And I often write in the morning, so I like to write kind of casually, whether it's like for content or just for myself.
Mhm.
But I try not to like jump right into work. I try to like do a little bit of writing, drink my coffee. Sometimes I'll like text message with some friends.
Mhm.
I like that slow start, no matter what
Yeah.
time my first client is. And I'm a morning person, so I like
Mhm.
it an 8 or 9 a.m. client. So I just make sure that I've got the time in the morning to do that. And so, thinking about like creating space, I feel like I create energetic space,
Mhm.
even when I don't necessarily have all the time. I think I have this idea in my mind. I'm like, I'd love 2 hours of
Yes.
like freedom, but that doesn't always work. And so I
Mhm.
just make sure that the time I do have is I use it in the way I need it.
Mhm. So it feels like a sense of freedom, even if it's not as spacious or as long as you'd like it to.
Yes.
Is that a mindset piece? How do you bring in that kind of spacious energy without actually having the time?
Some of it's like boundaries with myself for sure.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
like because I consider myself a recovering perfectionist.
Mhm.
I'm a oldest daughter, high achiever. I think those of us that have graduate degrees, like there's got to be some level of perfectionism to do that,
Yes.
and achieve all of that. And so I think for myself, like there are times where I'm like, oh, well, my to-do list is long and I'm up and I could just get working at like 6:05.
Yes.
And and again, there are certain days I have to negotiate with myself. Like, okay, well,
Mhm.
if you work a little bit now, does that alleviate some stress later? And like maybe the answer that day is yes. But for the
Mhm.
most part, I have this negotiated thing with myself where I'm like, oh, I notice the urge coming up inside of me to get right to work because that is a well-earned pattern in my
Oh
system.
yeah.
And
What? Yeah.
simultaneously, I know me. I love morning coffee, chill with like just a little bit of writing and some text messaging some friends in my PJs.
Yes.
Like I love that. It feels good to me. I feel like myself in those
Mhm.
moments. And I'll just, I kind of think about it to myself like, well, I don't want to take away from me the thing I enjoy. Like I have control over that. And
Mhm.
if I'm not tending to me, I'm not going to be well boundaried with other people if they're not tending to me.
Absolutely. You have to set the precedent. Tend to yourself first.
Yes, for
I really
sure.
appreciate that. That's something I've been trying to do as well is start the morning with something for me because if you don't do it then, it easily unravels. I'm also eldest daughter perfectionist. So the to-do list is always long. It's a very
Yes.
ambitious to-do list. So it's easy to say, oh, but if I could just use this hour for something else, but then what's the cost of that down the road?
Right.
Not
Right.
just that day, but that week, that month, that year. And I love just taking a moment to remind yourself how much you enjoyed this coffee time
Hmm.
and how much you don't want to miss it. That
Yes.
emotional connection, I think, is enough to probably pull you forward into it.
Yeah. And then when I do, it's like any of the conflict that comes up inside of me around it, it
Hmm.
settles pretty quickly. Cause I'm like, no, I'm actually just enjoying the coffee. And like, I'll get to my to-do list. And what another thing
Yeah.
I know to be true is the to-do list will always be there.
Oh, yeah.
And there will always be things on it. There will almost never be a sense of full completion for me. And so I have just also gotten pretty comfortable, and that's been a hard one. But I've gotten pretty
Hmm.
comfortable with knowing at the end of the week, I will still have things on the to-do list that have to go on into next week, and the world around me isn't going to end for that reason.
That's right. The to-do list isn't changing.
Yep.
It's never completed. So why not take this time for yourself? Because what do you personally receive when you take that hour versus when you don't?
I think, you said like starting the day that way. Like I think for me, it
Hmm.
encourages slowness in the morning, which I
Mm.
need. Again, my system, it's ready to
Yes.
go. And so
Yes.
I need to remind my system, hey, we can do this differently.
Yeah.
So I think it slows me down, which then I think makes me better resource to sit with clients. So I think I'm
Hmm.
more available to them. I think I'm a better practitioner for that reason. and like also a complete human at the end of the day.
Mm,
I think like when the pandemic first started, this was not something I had like well negotiated because my whole schedule got flipped.
right.
Everything was different. And
Right.
so I found myself at the end of the day, I mean, I don't think I was a person. I don't know what kind of shell it's like
Yeah.
everything I had in me got used up, and I was so available to the last drop of the last session. And then the minute that session ended, it was like, who's Danica? What is she?
Right. You're gone.
Yeah.
Empty. It's true. Everything got so murky and there was so much support that needed to
Yes.
happen. And it was easy to, I mean, we'd never been through something like that before. So there
Yeah.
was no roadmap for it.
Right.
But you got to see what happens when you completely give everything away.
Yeah. It was very
Mm.
eye-opening to me. And I think, a couple months in, I had to really look at like what can I change right now? And one of the things
Yeah.
I changed that was my decision to leave academia because I was
Mm-hmm.
teaching and also in private practice. And I was like, one of these has to go. This doesn't actually balance
Yeah.
well anymore. And then from there it was, okay, I can do my schedule like this for 6 months. And then, oh, it's time for another schedule change. I actually don't want to see folks at 6 or 7 o'clock at night. That's too late for me. I'm a morning
Right.
person. Let's start
Right.
earlier, but again, that was
Yes.
evolving kind of over time. And I think because I allowed myself to see what was happening for me, then I could like respond to myself appropriately.
Right. You're just figuring out who you are, what you need, and then
Yeah.
adjusting.
Yes.
And it's really important to honor our rhythms, whether you're a morning person, you're a night person. Can we align with that rhythm instead of trying to force ourselves into a box somehow?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
We talk
I,
about that a lot in our team. We have
mm-hmm.
our at our group practice, there's 14 of us that see clients, and
Mm-hmm.
um there's like a definite split. Like
Uh-huh.
some of us are like, I would love to see a 7:30 or 8 a.m. client.
Yes.
And some folks are like, I don't want to see my first client until 10 or 11.
Yes.
And I think like, we're fortunate enough in our environment where we can make space for that, so
Mhm.
then essentially we're seeing across the practice people from maybe as early as 7 a.m. to like 8 or 9 p.m. sometimes.
Right.
And like we have just figured out a way collectively to make that work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for folks who don't have that kind of flexibility in a work environment, like thinking maybe they think about it with energy. If I'm more of an afternoon person or evening person, maybe there's a way for me to approach the beginning of the day
Yeah.
in a more comfortable or slower pace way that doesn't like tire me out at a time when I'm already less resourced.
Right. It sounds like a win-win for everyone. The clinicians get to show up when they're at their freshest. They get to go, at their own pace. And you also get to offer a much wider range of services across the
Yeah.
day. I feel like that's a great metaphor for anything, whether it's HSPs and non-HSPs, introverts and extroverts. If we can just
Yes.
highlight that we all bring something different and it all works together to form a full puzzle,
Yeah.
it's
Don't
such
you
an
wish like more work
asset.
environments would look at it that
Yes,
way?
I really do. Because it would benefit everyone.
Yeah, it really
Yeah.
would. And it would like it would take away some of the stigma. I think that,
Mm-hmm.
so many work environments are set up, and I identify as an extrovert, but I
Mm-hmm.
think so many work environments are set up for extroverts.
Mm-hmm.
And just like I think about my a couple of my very close friends who are introverted, highly sensitive, have a complex trauma history, and I just think
Yeah,
like, my goodness, there's not one environment set up for you.
exactly. Right. There's really not, but there needs to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's when you said you're an extrovert, I'm like, oh, that's why that morning connection, being able to text friends is so important.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? Just having that to meet that need. And I imagine you might not feel as fulfilled or energized if you didn't get that time. If
Yeah,
you went
that's a good
right
point.
into work.
Yeah, if I don't have that, like if folks aren't available or if I do have to jump right into work or something, I feel like this sadness that comes up, or
Yeah.
almost like a little longing for them, that I'm like, no, I
Hmm.
want to know where my people are and what they're doing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, if you could leave us with kind of a final message for HSPs who are maybe wanting to start making time and space for themselves or start reconnecting with their inner experience, what would that be?
That whatever your needs are, they are real and you deserve to have them met first and foremost by yourself.
Hmm, I love that. That's right. You deserve it.
Yeah.
Everybody does, including
Yeah,
you.
we really are like survival relies on us to show up for ourselves in these ways.
It does. Yeah, thank you. Well, Danica, before we wrap up, was there anything else that you wanted to share that we didn't get to?
No, I think this was great.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
So I want to thank you so much for being here, for just opening up this conversation. I think it's such an important one to include our physical internal experience and our healing work and just in our awareness, making time for that as well. Coming back home to ourselves is so important as HSPs. So I'll be sure to share your website, your Instagram, and your retreat in the show notes, your Healing Your Way Home retreat. Could you share with folks a little bit more about what that is?
Oh my gosh, it's like my life's work passion project. I love group healing spaces, and I said being an extrovert. But I think a big part of that is just comes from many years of doing group therapy and lots of education, and really just seeing like the value of people, one, being in connection with others who have a similar lived experience, but then two, like being able to hear from and bounce ideas off one another in a way that like helps to normalize and validate, what, like, oh, I struggle with this and I'm not alone. Because I think so many of us feel alone in our struggles, again, whether we're highly sensitive or we're a complex trauma survivor or both.
Mhm.
So to me, having that space where folks are coming together and it's just like a given, everyone knows like I'm going to be met and understood here. And we did two of the retreats last year, and we got to really see folks, their nervous system, their being like settles in by day
Yeah.
two. And I just feel like we have more access to really, really do some nervous system work when folks are outside of the kind of hustle and bustle and demand of their everyday life. And
Mhm.
because Brittany Marinike and I, who host it, are all HSPs ourselves, we can really tend to the environment in a thoughtful way. And as folks have shared, like, oh, I would really need this or that, we have a completely non-judgmental and open approach to making accommodations as we
Love
can, so
that.
that it actually feels like a nurturing and safe environment for people to access themselves and do that nervous system work.
Oh, it's so incredible. I mean, community is important for HSPs, but that co-regulation piece,
Yes.
having a safe space where your nervous system can just start to unwind and feel safe. And I can just attest to just the healing ability of retreat spaces,
Mm.
especially being held by clinicians, is just really powerful. So yeah, I'm so happy that you're offering this resource. It's such a needed one, especially coming out of the pandemic when there haven't been as many of those offerings. So yeah, I'm excited to share it with folks.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for that.
Thanks.